Hello. Today we have an opportunity to talk to one of the pioneers in the off-grid solar sector, Nedjip Tozun, who really, through effort with his one of his colleagues at Stanford, launched d.light, a company that has reached millions of people with energy and basic light and has revolutionized the whole concept of reaching out to poor people with energy needs. So, welcome, Najib.
Thank you, Assad. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think, maybe we can start by talking a little bit about, for people that don't know what off-grid solar is, talking about what your company does, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about you and how you got started in this field.
Yeah, sure. So d.light is a company that basically brings transformative products to people without access to electricity. And we have a line of solar products in addition to appliances that work on those solar products. And we both develop the products, distribute them, and finance them to the customer. We work in India and across sub-Saharan Africa.
The inception of this, I understand, that started at Stanford. But what drove you as a person that's clearly had a social heart or a desire to help people? Where did you grow up? Why were you motivated in working in emerging markets? Not a lot of people coming out of Stanford want to do that, but maybe you can give me a sense of what prompted this idea of delight.
Yeah, sure. My path was not a completely a straight line, when I reflect on it. But I grew up in Silicon Valley, but my dad immigrated to the U.S. from Cyprus. So he was from northern Cyprus, which is the Turkish part. And I had a chance as a kid to go there every like couple summers, and spend my summers there. And in northern Cyprus is sort of a unique place because it's actually an unrecognized country. So it's a bit cut off from a lot of the rest of the international community in many ways. Sometimes the infrastructure wasn't always working. People didn't have all the same opportunities there that I got to have in Silicon Valley. So I think that left kind of an impression on me at a young age of there being these disparities around the world, and disparities of opportunity based on where you're born, which always felt unfair to me. So there was something in me that wanted to do something about that. But at the same time, I was very much, I mean, I loved, math and science and engineering, and I loved kind of the innovative spirit of Silicon Valley. And when I was in college, actually, I ended up changing my major like seven different times. They're always in this sort of like engineering tech world. But I found that every time I tried to specialize, I would get a panic and feel like I don't know if I want to do this specifically my whole life. And anyway, I ended up graduating and worked as an engineer for about 6 months, and then quit to start my own business with some friends, and found that I just loved being an entrepreneur, and that's really what I was wired to do. And it sort of explained why I was such a generalist in a way and so fascinated by everything and not wanting to specialize. So I kind of found I had that love of entrepreneurship, and you can be creative and bring things into the world. Um, and I really wanted to figure out a way of how to leverage that to make an impact in emerging markets, kind of like that impact that those trips had made in me, from my childhood. So I heard about this thing called social entrepreneurship, and I thought that's what I want to do. That's I feel like that's what I'm wired to do. Um, and I looked around at the different like business school programs at the time. This is back in 2004, 2005. And at that time, there was a lot happening at Stanford around this idea of social entrepreneurship. And it wasn't necessarily a lot. It's probably like maybe 20 students out of the few hundred that were excited about this stuff. But they had this class at the design school, actually. It was called Design for Extreme Affordability. The business students and engineers, and they were coming out with some amazing innovations. Some of them were spinning out to social impact businesses. And I thought, that's what I'm meant to do. So I applied only to Stanford. I thought if I don't get in, it's not meant to be, but I ended up getting in, and then basically made sure I got into this class. In fact, you have to apply to get into the class once you were in. And I didn't get into the class, but I just kept showing up because I was so convinced that was the whole reason I was there. Anyway, I got into this Design for Extreme Affordability class, which is where I met Sam Goldman, my business partner. And he also an American, but grew up, his parents were in development. So he grew up in India and Pakistan and Peru and parts of Africa. And actually, before business school, he had been living for 4 years in Benin in West Africa. And while he was there, his neighbor's son was burned in a kerosene accident, where the kerosene lamp tipped over and this boy was totally burned, who ended up surviving actually, but took months to recover. And Sam, had that experience and just thought this is such an injustice that we're in the 21st century, but yet you have over 1 billion people still using kerosene lanterns as their primary source of light. This doesn't make any sense. So he wanted to do something about it. I had kind of more of the tech entrepreneurship background. He had the market experience and market background, and we both had that shared passion, shared values, and that's where we started. It started as a project within the D school. We called it d.light because it was the D school, and then and d.light. That's the emotion we want all of our customers to feel. So that was a good unifying
Very
theme.
good name.
Yeah, it's a great name. And then basically we graduated with a little bit of seed funding, and I moved to China. That's where we're initially building the products and figure out how do we make this stuff affordably, and connected this human-centered design insights with supply chain insights. And Sam moved to India, which is our very first market, and that's how we started.
That's how. So you are pretty much a risk taker because you didn't apply to any other school except for Stanford. So,
Yeah,
so, so you had a strong conviction and then you knew what you wanted in your life.
I tend to be that way in
Yeah.
most things. So
I guess you need that to be an entrepreneur, which is quite it's not an easy task, and especially to make a company that has revenues that exceeds hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's just quite incredible. One of the most commercially viable sector for providing energy into the sector. Uh, in the
yeah.
initial years, how were you sort of financing yourself? I'm asking these questions as young people that watch this video have a sense of the struggle and the hard work and sometimes sheer luck that got you here. So
Yeah.
maybe you can describe those initial struggles in your career.
Yeah, there was quite a lot of those. So I can, so where to start? But I will talk about sort of our funding journey and how that's evolved over time. So when we started out, we really had mostly impact investors that were investing in us. So Acumen Fund was one of our very first investors. We had a few others that were really interested in the impact of what we were doing. We didn't have any sales at that time, but they really were kind of believing in the team and the passion that we had. And we had a prototype product. I mean, we had customer feedback, but we really were pre-revenue back then. And we did get actually a venture investor who kind of saw this as a big opportunity. They were both based in India and the US, so they were an investor as well. And then that was sort of the beginning. And then, over time, the next round was led by a Midyar Network, which was another impact investor. And I think maybe when I say impact investor, because that can mean different things and different people, and it's maybe evolved over time. So I guess the way I would describe what it meant for those particular investors is that they were like patient capital, is what I would kind of call them. They understood that they wanted to have a return on their investment. So this wasn't a donation, but they, expected a lower ROI than a typical commercial investment. And I think, well, actually, when we started out, we thought it would be easier and faster than it turned out to be. And I can tell you about what those challenges turned out to be. But I think in particular, when you're pioneering a new area in emerging markets, you often find that there's not partners necessarily you can work with that you might find in the developed markets. Like there aren't like big Walmart distributors that just reach the rural communities, the areas we work in, and we ended up having to get into distribution ourselves. I can talk about that later. Or the financing, same thing. Banks weren't willing to finance our customers. We had to become essentially a fintech company. That was not in our initial business plan whatsoever. We kind of naively thought we build a great product at the right value for money, and we can build a business, and that was necessary but insufficient to do that. So that said, I think those early investors sort of realized that to really make meaningful change, it can take a long time, and you have to be patient. And I think having that patient capital at the beginning was really important. And then over time, as we started to prove the commercial viability of the model, which took a long time, and I can talk about how we got there. We
Yeah.
were able to sort of evolve from impact funds and then into like private equity and more commercial capital. And I would say they still have like a heart. All the investors we work with, they might have some impact mandate, or they might have to report on impact or carbon offset, those sorts of things, but they would have more typical commercial return requirements also in their funds. But we do think it's important to work with investors who are values aligned with us, and we've been able to continue to do that. But I would say sort of the level of patience of capital just decreases when you're sort of like when you're accessing larger pools of funding, and that's a kind of a natural transition if you want to access larger pools of capital. That's just how that's structured. So that's been the evolution. It's been an 18-year journey, so it's a very condensed
Yes.
version of that. But that's generally how it's evolved.
Najib, when you going to your initial part, and then we can come to your growth part, and
Yeah.
then really scaling up part. In the initial years, when you sort of came across Sam and you came across this idea of doing it, you know, I presume you didn't do many surveys to see what the market was. You took, just like you took a single approach to Stanford, you felt that there was a need and went into it. Is that right? Or were you also
Yeah.
looking at the market demands for the product?
Well, I would say we did know that this was a big market opportunity slash market failure that was happening. We got a lot of statistics and data on how many people were using kerosene as a primary source of light, how much were they spending on it, what a product, what would be the payback period of a product, so it would make economic sense, for people to upgrade to like a solar powered light, for example. And our research was not, large scale quantitative, although we got like some of that high level data to understand what's the whole market opportunity. But we were partnered with a organization. Actually, it was an organization in Myanmar, was partnered with the design school. And we had a chance with our little initial team to do a couple of trips to Myanmar, where initially it was need finding, interviews of lots of customers, and then bringing prototypes, getting feedback, seeing how much people would be willing to actually pay. So we did get some data, but I would say it was rather than sort of like broad sort of data on the market when it comes to the product, it was very deep with tens of customers instead of thousands. But that's in a way that's part of the design school IDEO type of thinking. It's like go very deep to get the insights with a smaller handful of customers, and of course you often couple that with more broad scale market research. But I think we had enough conviction that the market was big enough. There was enough people using kerosene lanterns, and if we could make something that was competitive to the alternative, because people hated kerosene. I think we were very clear, that
Yes.
that wasn't something people liked using. That if we can make something better and get it to people, make it available and affordable, it should work. So that was like our very basic thinking on why we thought we could scale.
So in the framing of it with acumen, just for new entrepreneurs,
Hmm.
is seeing what was the tools that you used to convince your initial investors. I mean, besides a great idea, right? You had it, and you were able to sort of have the backing of the design school to build some of this. What took for you to get your first investor? Acumen being a great, sort of social investor, what was it that you would advise younger people that are starting out on the social venture path? Is how did you manage to get the nest? That is the real, can be the real challenge.
Yeah, that can be the challenge. I would say a few things on this. One, when they're investing that early, they invest really in the team. So, it was me and Sam. We had a couple other people on that core team as well, who were doing the product development. And I think they could just see all of us were absolutely passionate and dedicated and would not give up. So I think, part of it was just, and I've talked to them about this later. Like, why did you, why did you invest in us? We didn't have like, we didn't have any revenue. You're very unproven. So a large part of it was they just really thought that we were the kinds of entrepreneurs that wouldn't give up. Um, how they came to that conclusion, how we came across, I'm not sure everything we did, but I think they got that impression from us, that we were very sincere, very dedicated, and we're gonna, really have perseverance. I think the other thing, and it's two other things. One is we were very focused in these early investor meetings and telling customer stories of, I talked about, went very deep with a lot of these customers. I mean, Sam and I would spend the night in these villages and spent, we really got to know some of these customers really well, understand their pain points, understand how they think. Because we also have to realize this isn't like an Apple product where I'm also the intended target, and maybe I'm the designer and the target customer.
Yeah.
In this case, these are people living in villages. They're not us. They have maybe different mindsets or different way they look at things, different preferences. So we went in really with that kind of a childlike mindset of, teach us. We want to know. We're not telling you, giving them many things to choose from, and just being quiet and seeing what they gravitate towards, sometimes being surprised by it. And I think being able to communicate the customer like in a compelling way about their pain point, what their needs are, what they'd be willing to pay with those stories, I think gave also some conviction that there seemed to be a product market fit, even if we didn't have, the big quantitative data to show that. And then the third thing I would say, what we tried to do to gain some conviction that we'd be able to sell the product, because we knew we would have to sell through distributors. And what we did is actually, through the help of some of our classmates, got connected to some distributors in India, who basically gave us kind of like letters of intent of like, if you develop this product and it's this price, I will buy 5,000 units. I don't know how legally binding they were, honestly, but I think just showing something that showed like, hey, if we make this product, we can sell it, and we believe we can sell it, but build it at this cost. And we had also details of why, on the supply chain side, of why we had conviction about the cost. So I think, being able to bring that to the table was something concrete. But ultimately, at that stage, they're really investing in the people, so they try to get to know us well.
So you have to have some transparency, tell a story, experience, live their life of the people that are really you're trying to benefit, and and have a compelling story about yourself in terms
Yeah.
of course, your Stanford credentials were certainly a big plus for both of you. So after the initial funding that got you launched, maybe you can talk about the key challenges that you faced over time in terms of
Hmm.
technology, your product. By the way, Najib, have
Yeah.
still solar lights from d.light, and they are 10 years
Yeah.
old and they still work.
That's
Incredible. I
good.
mean, I think I have a shed in the garden, and it's a d.light system. And,
Yeah.
so it's incredible that after 10 years, although it's not used as much, but it is 10 years and it still works. So maybe talk a little bit about your key challenges as you started to get some attraction, get some funders. What were the next stage? How do you saw that? How did you overcome some of the challenges as you grew? Because that
Yeah.
brings about its own challenges.
Yeah, for sure. So there's a couple things I'll say around this, but I do want to kind of talk about that quality point, because that was something that I think, from the beginning, we knew we wanted to build a brand that's known for quality, because we felt that's what ultimately it was going to be, word of mouth that spread
Yeah.
the news about the product.
Yeah.
And rural customers, I mean, we heard this over and over again. They're so used to getting screwed by products that don't do what they say, they fail after a few months. So we really just did everything we could to make sure the product was robust. And even in some of like the battery choices we made, I mean, there's, other players in the market that'll just save a little money, have a battery life that's 3 or 5 years. And from the customer's perspective, it's like that seems fine. But we really focus on batteries that will be like 10 plus years. And so now when we go to the field, because we do go back and like see customers using products 10 years later, they are evangelists,
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
village
sure.
about the d.light brand, because every other thing is broken, but the d.light one still works. And that's a very conscious choice we took at the beginning of kind of how we built our brand, kind of like I said, delighting the customer. That's sort of a key, central for us. But kind of getting to the challenges, and we certainly did have actually quality challenges at the very beginning, because you can have that ambition and desire, but actually making that happen at scale is really, really tough. And I remember the very first container that we shipped to India. We thought these were products were all going to be like perfect and working really well. And by the time they landed, there's a flaw in the circuit, and it was like basically the batteries were killed by the time it landed. So there's a lot of those kinds of issues at the beginning where we would have to rework. Sometimes we would put stuff in the field and find some problem. I remember one area of India, the vents in the product that was for cooling it, or for heat dissipation. These bugs in this part of India were able to get into the product and then basically
Yeah.
block the light. So we had to go back, recall them, put mesh in them so the bugs can. So there were lots of stuff like that where we had to really just it felt like whacking a mole. But you do that enough, and eventually, and you keep continuously innovating, and then the product gets really robust. So, but just having that, constant, mentality of we have to make sure the customer has a great experience. So that definitely kept us up a lot. But I think where we faced like kind of one of our first like really big challenges of, oh man, I don't know, we have to sort of reinvent ourselves, was we really started hitting a wall in terms of our revenue growth, working through distributors. And we had these sort of like I said, B2B partners, but as a lot of these partners didn't really go that deep into the rural areas. These products often require some demonstration to the customer. Distributors selling lots of different stuff. We're not their main focus. Maybe you can get them to do stuff for a few months, but then they move on to something else. And we were finding that it was increasingly difficult to, and especially as we were getting into bigger systems, we were starting to get into solar home systems, which is even more complicated from an after sales perspective. Even some installation might be required. And there really weren't existing distributors in these areas that could do it. So that was a big pivot point for us where we had to decide, are we going to become also a distribution business? And if that does, it's a lot more capital. It's a lot harder. Do we even know how to do distribution? And when we raised our Series B round with this Meteor network, that was part of sort of the pitch is we're going to do this. It'll start in Africa. There's a number of reasons why it made sense to do it there in East Africa. And now we have a huge last mile distribution network. It seems very obvious now. Many of the other players do that as well. But at the time, we just thought we're a product business, and that's all we need to be. But actually, to actually crack this problem, when solar didn't even exist as a category, when our brand wasn't necessarily known that well, and when the distributors we're working with didn't have the capabilities we needed, we had to do it ourselves. And that was something that we had to double down on and do. I remember this big senior management team meeting we had. It was a big debate, and then we decided, okay, we're going to do this because that's the only way we're going to get to getting 100 million people off kerosene. That was sort of our target goal when we started. There's no way we can get there unless we get into the distribution ourselves.
So, in that initial part of your adventure, I may say, or struggle,
Hmm.
did you have fear of failure? And how did you overcome that fear of self-doubt, failure, depression when things didn't go right, when the lights came out and all the batteries were knocked
I
out?
know,
What
I
got
know.
you,
There's
what keep you motivated? What energy did you source to continue to work?
I think there was a few things. I mean, one, having a great partner is a business partner is amazing. And then having a great partner in marriage also is amazing. Those things both have helped me a lot, in kind of going through those challenging periods. And I think there was just a real sense, and I think this is Sam would say this too, maybe in a different way. I mean, but there was a real sense for me that this was like a calling, I had. And even if we were to fail, I was going to go down with the ship, if that makes sense. And we're just going to try it to the very last breath, for this.
Yeah.
And if it fails, it fails. And even if it failed, we would have still impacted a lot of people. Um, we obviously you don't want your baby to die. I mean, the company to die. So it was scary at those times. But really, it's sort of about, when you're going through those tough times, it's like each day, like, can I make a little progress forward? And what do I need to do today? And then having like a good like support outlet network, is helpful. And like I said, I wasn't like looking around for what's next during those times. It's really all about like, okay, what do I need to do today? What's the right thing to do? And you do enough of those and you make enough of those gains, you get out of those periods, hopefully. I mean, it's not guaranteed. I mean, you have to have sometimes a little luck as well, but we seem to always have just enough luck to get to the next
Can
next
you talk
phase.
about at what time did you have your lowest point in your career with Delight? And what was the highest point where you felt on cloud nine that gave you more energy?
Yeah, I would say kind of the lowest point for me was probably um, around that time. I was just talking about where we're pivoting to distribution, raise that fund. And I think I was just feeling completely burned out because at that point, it had been 4 years of just like nonstop insanity, living in a
Right.
different country, um, without a large support network there. And it was something I tell like young entrepreneurs or older entrepreneurs too, actually, but is, to really to think about yourself like a rechargeable battery. I mean, because I think about this because we work with rechargeable batteries. But because with these batteries, they can, you can deplete them and then charge them up again and you cycle them back and forth. But you need a protection in the circuit called deep discharge protection. And if you don't have that protection, well, basically the protection, basically when the battery gets low enough, it gets cut off. You can't take any more out of the battery. If you don't have that in the circuit, you can actually keep sucking energy out of the battery. It looks like it's working, but then when you try to charge it up again, it never goes full. You've like damaged the battery. And I think we can be like that too. Not necessarily in a day or a week, but over time, you can really deep discharge yourself. And I think that happened to me. And I just had very little capacity for a while as a result of that. And yeah, I mean, so I would say that was probably like and that took a while to recover from. And I think that, when I reflect on that, having outlets outside of the company, finding ways to dissociate your own identity with the company. I mean, you can care about it, but you are also not your business. You have an identity. You are loved outside of that too, and you are valuable outside of your business. I think that's something a lot of entrepreneurs need to hear, social entrepreneurs, but also entrepreneurs in general, because if the company is high, you might get your head over inflated. If the company is low, you can really be really depressed, and you need to find a way to care, but also not have your own be on that roller coaster to that extent. So that's something I've tried to learn to do over time. I'm not saying I do it perfectly, but I've been able to have a little bit more of that objectivity with it. Like it's obvious I care tremendously
Of course,
about it, but to also have some sense of self outside of it is really important. So I think that's been a
balancing
big
act,
learning.
right, with your
Yeah.
dedication to the company and sort of, keeping care of the person, like sharpening the saw, as Colby
Yeah,
puts it, right? To make sure
exactly.
that you don't lose, it is a very, especially you started a whole, you and I think Greenlight Planet were really the initial pioneers
Yeah,
in this space,
really
and
just the two of us, a couple others, companies, or there are not many of us doing this at that time.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, we
So
were
it's
really forging new
really,
ground.
and you, along with the Sun King, really have maintained and continue to grow despite numerous challenges that you had
Yeah.
through COVID, through,
Oh
all
man,
the supply
nonstop.
chain issues and the frauds and, yeah, all sorts of things that, I've seen Delight go through. Um, but maybe talk about the high point. When was the high point when you felt that you really have done something meaningful in the world and you felt on cloud nine?
Yeah. Well, I'll say two things on this. One is sort of like a more obvious one, and one's a less obvious. One was actually achieving our founding mission. So we said we want to get 100 million people off kerosene, and we did it in 2020. And that was a very surreal moment. I mean, we had a big party
Yeah,
as a company and brought our founders, or at least the ones who could make it to
yeah,
Kenya, brought all of them back. And it was just such an amazing celebration, and kind of look back and it's like, that's so many people. And we can get, uh, yeah, a little lost in the day to day sometime, but
exactly.
well, yeah, that it's amazing, and not many companies achieve like their founding mission. I mean, that's just it was such a crazy ambitious mission when we started out. So I mean, it's definitely, comes to mind as the major high point for me. And then the other, which I said the less obvious one. I took my when we were living in Nairobi, I took my son. He was I think 6 years old at the time, on one of the field visits to visit a customer. And those customer visits are always great. I mean, to see like
Yeah,
the
that's
the
right.
impact in person, and also get to learn stuff. I always learn things talking to our customers. Um, and in this case, the customer had a kid who was my kid's age, so like they kind of like interacted and played a little bit together. And like that child actually had like very serious asthma, until they got the solar home system, and then it went away after they stopped burning kerosene. And that was, it's always heartwarming to hear those kinds of stories. And then that night when we were at home, you never know like what kind of impression this makes on a young kid. But it is like a little out of character for him, but he just like looked at me and said, Daddy, I'm proud of you. you know, and to me, that was a huge
Yeah,
professional eye. I mean,
that
if you
that
can make
that
your
is
kid
that
proud
is
of you,
that's
that's what it's all about. So yeah, I found that gave me a lot more satisfaction than any public award or any of those things.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
meaningful. So because your kids are
Yeah, I
honest
think
with you.
that's
So
probably burnt in your memory. You will
it
never
is,
forget
it's burnt in there. So I'm
that.
thankful for that.
Yeah.
I don't know if he remembers it now, but I always will.
Yeah, no, I think it is it's quite sometimes kids speak honestly and they can really communicate well, especially it's
Yeah.
gratifying.
Yeah.
Besides quality, which I think you bring, and I think my solar home system, because it's more like going on 15 years now.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so
good.
it's and I have
Makes me
I
happy.
have right there some of the $5 lights that you had produced, those little ones,
Yeah.
whatever you call them.
Those should keep cranking too. Those
Yeah,
should keep going.
none of my, I have several of
Yeah.
your delight, and I also have Sun King, but
Hmm.
both of you, I mean, they did a great job in terms of quality, and that's why you are where you are. But I think my question to you around is what other attributes, qualities that you focused on to make the
Hmm.
business grow? The human element,
Yep.
marketing element. What would you say that for, people that are looking to do these types of things, quality, clarity, what else did you think was attribute that made Delight such a success?
Yeah. And what I would say on this, because there's many things actually, ways to answer that question, but I think what I would go to is like, what are the core guiding like values of the company? And the values is like also a filter of what kinds of people we recruit. It kind of guides our decisions. So I don't mean it in a fluffy way. It's like a very in a very concrete way. And those values we capture in this acronym called I hope. So the I is being innovative, H is being honest, O is optimistic, P is passionate, and E is empathetic. And if I'll just take that first one. I won't do a whole master class like that. I hope values. It'll take the whole time. But I guess on the first one, being innovative, I think driving that kind of innovative spirit within the whole company, and not just about product innovation, but innovating. Um, Part of that is also just being resilient and adaptive as things change in the market, because our markets are just, there's all kinds of curveballs you're going to get all the time. And then you can not like it, you can complain about it, or you can I guess as part of the optimism too, be optimistic and say, well, maybe it opens up an opportunity, maybe we have to go here instead of there, okay, we're going to change our plans. So I think having that spirit with the leaders we recruit in the organization and build up and have promoted and reinforce, like the ones who really are able to pivot to say like, hey, this worked for us in the past, but now we have to do this. That's really what's enabled us, I think, to grow like amidst a very dynamic environment. Pivoting into doing distribution at a very macro scale was a big thing that didn't seem logical in some ways, the outside. But if you're kind of inside, it's like, yeah, we have to innovate and do this and figure it out. And similarly, when we've gotten into the consumer finance of the products, which is a whole other can of worms and topic we could get into, but that was a very similar sort of bet the company moment where we realized if we were going to be relevant and keep scaling, we had to figure out financing and to the customer. And to do that meant building all kinds of capabilities we didn't have, just like with distribution, how that had happened before. And I think we applied that same sort of innovative spirit in attacking that. That's enabled us to kind of do it, but also continuously learn and innovate, and not assume that what worked for us in the past will work in the future. And I can say similar things about those other values and how they've guided us, but I think having those really embedded in the organization and the people we hire, our team, I think has enabled us to get to where we are.
So adaptability, I heard a lot.
Yeah.
Flexibility, and being pragmatic, without losing sight of the longer term goal. And honest. I think honesty and
Yeah.
trust are very important with the investors as well, right? So you talked about
Hmm.
financing gains and then your next level of financing, and you not only innovated in terms of product, but you were one of the first solar companies to actually securitize
Yeah.
assets, and you were able to achieve that successfully. So maybe we can pivot now to a little bit about the financing aspects. You had the
Hmm.
early believers, the deeply socially interested people like Omidyar and Acumen that initially funded you. But then with the scaling, how was important was it? And also, I think in some cases, when you get into people that are purely commercial investors, their priorities in terms of growth and for growth can also be a
Hmm.
challenge for the industry. So, how
Yeah.
did you balance those factors?
Yeah, and I'm thankful with the investors we've had along the way, like those, like let's say private equity or commercial level investors. They've not been the type to push for growth at all costs, and I think we've seen some of that in our sector, and that's very dangerous in a business where you are financing the customers because you could it's growth can be easy if you are willing to cut corners on credit, um, so you have to have the right kind of growth, and both at the right kind of credit quality, but also with sustainable unit economics. And I think that's where, if I look at sort of the trajectory of the industry, there have been, some companies that kind of weren't able to kind of cross that chasm of getting to the larger scale. And I think part of it was that pressure on just maybe growth at all costs, with the thought that there will be, if you just can show the growth trajectory, there'll be more and more funding available. And I think, particularly in emerging markets and in Africa, the funding can be a little fickle, in the sense of liquidity can be available sometimes and sometimes it's not. And, I think building an organization that can be resilient and profitable and, really kind of figuring out the cash flow side, like with securitization, that was really like the puzzle for us of how do we figure out a scalable funding model that can generate cash flow. I know
Without the
those
need
can,
for equity, right?
without the need for equity, um, is really was really important to us because we felt it was a real risk to keep betting the company on raising larger and larger equity rounds, and in an environment where equity can be more uncertain even if you have that growth. So I think that's something that that we focus on, and I think the investors we brought on understand that, and have been looking at it from. I mean, they are looking at sort of a good commercial ROI, but I think they see probably the valuation multiples and things in the space are going to be more driven by the profitability than just the top line in our sector, and we tend to agree with that. I think when you're a small startup, you need to look at the revenue growth, but when you mature, you need to make sure the whole business is sustainable. And I think that's, and I would say the companies that have been successful in this space have been able to sort of make that pivot towards looking at those kinds of metrics. And thankfully, we've had investors who have bought into that as well, and believe in that, and have helped us get there. So I think finding the right commercial investors is important. And like I mentioned, I think a little earlier, the the commercial investors we have, they also do care about our mission and they believe in that. They care about the impact that we create. So, I haven't felt like they were, have been pulling us away from our mission, but they just want to make sure we're growing sustainably and are healthy commercially, because that'll enable them to have a healthy return. So, um, yeah, that's how it's progressed. I mean, there's a whole range of investors out there, and I think working with the right ones with that right mindset is really important.
So choose your partners carefully. Don't be so
Yes, for
desperate to
sure.
choose anybody that comes along. In the longer
Yeah.
run, you have to have partners with your with your conviction and also for profitability, right? Because it is
Yeah.
you have to give profitability to investors. It's not without that. So maybe moving on from sort of the success of d.light and the challenges that d.light faced as an institution, we can talk a little bit more about the industry, the off-grid solar
Yeah.
industry as a whole, which in the initial years when I remember, I remember when I was at Deutsche, we made a $4 million loan to you in
Yeah.
2010. That was
And
when
thank you for
off-grid.
that. You were a pioneer. That was
Yeah, at that stage, not many
yeah,
people even knew about it, and that
I
loan was
know.
repaid fully.
It was, it was.
So that
Absolutely.
was a good experience. But the at that time, Najib, if you remember, I got calls from hedge fund saying, "Oh, we want to take advantage of the first mover, and we see this as the cell phone, because that's what initially, the comparison was that,
Yep.
cell phone industry was a hockey stick, and they really came through, and you know that growth level wasn't achieved, and then unfortunately subject to several challenges on the COVID front, that and the supply chain, and then some frauds, Mobisol,
Hmm.
that a large fraud that happened, and perpetual, sort of some of the failures of the larger companies that led to sort of further drying out of the equity space, and
Yeah.
that element of the industry. So, how do you view that element of the struggle, and how do you view the future of off-grid solar?
Yeah. Well, I think in terms of sort of that struggle period, that you're talking about, where it was sort of preceded by this almost over enthusiasm of a lot of equity coming into the space, a lot of new players getting funding, and yeah, that I think there was a little bit of an over exuberance that it happened, and we actually I do believe this can be like the mobile phones leapfrogging landlines, and so I do see similarities in that, but the reality is these are like they won't scale at the same rate as a mobile phone. There's a number of reasons for that. These are higher ticket items. You need financing as you get into home systems. There's a lot of other factors that mean it will be slower to get there than the mobile phones were, but I believe it can get there, especially if you have very scalable funding mechanisms like the securitization. Um, but what I think happened is a lot of companies, they got a lot of funding. They essentially were aiming to be vertically integrated businesses from day one of doing excellent products that they would do themselves, distribution and financing. I think companies like d.light and Sun King and some others who've been around slogging for a long time, we had years to kind of develop each one of those things with a lot of learnings, a lot of tough lessons. And I think companies, even if they got a lot of money and funding, to try and build it all simultaneously, it was almost an impossible task to ask, because those are all complicated things, and they all have to be. If one fails, one piece of those fails, then the whole thing doesn't work. And I know there were some companies who had massive product quality issues, and if the product doesn't work, customers aren't going to keep paying for it. And as you know, there were some issues of fraud, like the distribution channel wasn't managed well. and all of those kind of take the learnings and the right experience to run. Um, so I think that you have companies that sort of try to bite off a lot and then weren't able to execute well, and then just couldn't raise more funding. And at the end of the day, though, I do think that the way this industry is, you have to be kind of at a certain minimum scale for the business to be profitable. So it's very difficult to be, a small player. Let's say if you're like the number five, biggest player in a country, it becomes very hard to be sustainable and profitable because if you think about it, like the fixed cost of having a distribution network and a credit, like that you need a certain throughput through that channel to make it all work. So I don't think this industry was ever going to be necessarily 100 players. And I think that's sort of what the amount of funding coming in, it was funding, probably about that many. So then as a result, it sort of consolidated down to a few, a handful of players. And I think that's healthy. It's not a monopoly
Yeah.
space either, for sure. I mean, there's room for multiple players in the space, and that's good. There's good to be healthy competition. But I think realistically, 3, 4 players per market is probably for the
Good.
big markets, that's probably where it'll settle out at and where it is settling out at. So I think it's kind of gone through that consolidation period. And now we're in a phase of, there was like the hype cycle, I guess, the down, and now we're in a sustainable growth. You see that with a lot of industries, honestly. So I think actually now is a really good time to invest in our sector because we've figured out, all the issues and problems, and we know we have a business model that's really honed over time and can scale, and have kind of been through all that. Whereas I think sometimes investors look at it and say, oh, there have been some failures in this space, so I'm just going to not invest in this space at all, and I'll chase this next new thing. But I'll tell you the new thing, and I know what some of these new areas are. They're going to go through the same thing because I could see a lot of money going to those spaces. A lot of companies, a lot will collapse, and then you'll have a few winners, and and they'll grow and have good returns over
Tried
time.
and
But
tested sort of
yeah.
companies that you said. In terms of the future for the sector, you feel
Mhm.
that more concentrated uh, elements of companies and not a large volume of companies that are can achieve the scale, and the challenge between profitability and affordability can be met, right? Because that's and the
Yeah.
Nokia did a lot for the mobile phone, right? They were cheap. They can just buy them off. Some of the solar home systems, larger holders require financing. So you're a product company and a leasing company. It's a very,
Yeah.
different type of mix. Uh, what is your, I guess, prediction? How do you see this in the off-grid solar industry evolving in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I think there'll be, there's not going to be 100 companies. There'll be sub 10, and I think that's sort of what it's already starting to consolidate down towards. That's my prediction, at least. We'll
Yeah.
see. I could be wrong. And I think, what we're seeing is, the trends are all going in a very good direction in a way where like securitization is getting more and more acceptable as a way of financing for our sector. And I think that will help grow things. I think you have now widespread excitement and adoption of solar among the population. That was not always the case. The cost trends continue to go in the right direction for things like the batteries and solar. So I think that's still going to remain, really, there's going to be more and more exciting and attractive product offerings that are coming. There are some large amounts of funding that are going into distributed renewable energy. Like the World Bank has a big program called the Ascent program. They're taking $5 billion to figure out how to get people energy access, and they think about half the people who are off grid in Africa. That's 600 million people off grid. About half will end up with these distributed energy solutions, and that's going to result in more favorable policy, potentially subsidies in some markets, and other things that'll help grow the market. So I think there's going to be a lot of tailwinds, though for sure is going to be continued, things that are going to be unexpected that happen in our markets. I think that's we expect that as well. But we know at least from like there's never been really a demand problem from us. I mean, in the sense of we have like a product, people love the product. It's really, can we supply it? Can we finance it at and good rates to the customer? And can we do that at scale? So I think as companies like us and others start building that track record, are able to get more and more of this kind of capital we can use to finance to customers. will continue to grow the sector. And then once customers get home systems too, they want appliances. And then we are very well set up to provide energy efficient appliances on finance, and no one else can do that. So it's not like once we get a solar home system in a home, because we have a very long life on these solar home systems, it's not like we're done with the customer.
Yeah.
There's actually
Yeah.
many other things they would
Right.
want from us. So I think there's a lot,
Do you
a
see
really
that in
exciting
the
future
future
ahead.
that you can provide other beneficial products to consumer through those
Yeah.
channels that
Yeah.
you established?
And we already do that. And in fact, the d.light brand in our markets, like kind of to investors, we're sort of thought of as a solar brand, but to customers, we are lights and fans and TVs and mobile charging. Those are the things, and we bundle these things with our offerings, because people don't want energy just for energy's sake. They want the because their homes
Utilization of
they want
energy.
the utilizations. And if they just buy an appliance in the market, it might be very energy inefficient. They may not get a good experience, but we can give them an experience that's not only really good on their solar home system, but also finance, so that's more affordable for them. So I think there's
Yeah.
a lot of benefits that we and other players in the sector can bring, beyond just the core energy system. So there's, I think, a really exciting future. And our customers, they want ultimately everything we get to have with electricity. And that's like, there'll be laptops and fridges and other things that we
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
to deliver to our customers. There's no reason they shouldn't be able to
Yeah.
have these kinds of appliances over time.
Yeah. That's really very nice. I went one to Bangladesh a while back, and I remember going into this rural area, very poor, sort of hut, but on the hut inside was a table, and the table was full of books. So the kids were going to, go through
Yeah.
education, and the future of Bangladesh really, they've done very well, from the basket case to that. And I think,
Right.
so, that's what Kissinger said about Bangladesh. And now,
Mm,
if you look at Bangladesh and Pakistan, where I'm originally from, the basket case is Pakistan. So, so quite a transition there. So these types of interventions of providing light, and I think for references, you talked about your son visiting with somebody who had asthma.
yeah.
For people don't know, they use these they're like tiki torches, right?
Yeah.
They burn kerosene, and it is horribly
Oh, it's terrible.
difficult to sit, and especially to read. They have to put it very close to the books where they are.
Yeah.
Those are
Breathing in those fumes right in their face. It's
yeah,
it's
yeah. I mean,
terrible.
4 million people are dying in Africa because of exhaustion of cook stoves, and these
Yeah.
elements are there. Um, Maybe I think, well, what I could ask you is, what do you need? What is that you are looking for within d.light for the future? Clearly financing is one of it, but what type of financing, and what role do you think that the development banks and foundations, we all can improve, right? There's a room for
Hmm.
improvement for all of us, while they've done and supported you in very important ways. Where do you see that? How do you see, the role of these, pioneers and the front line of financing such ventures? What do you need from them? How could they do a better job of serving young social entrepreneurs that are bringing, they're changing the world effectively.
Yeah.
What you've done has changed the world.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say a number of things. Maybe I'll start with d.light and I'll say more broadly. Um, I think as we continue to scale up these kind of securitization vehicles, being able to have uh, tiered capital within those structures, where you can have, let's say, a first loss layer, or uh, or even an equity layer in the structure. But what I'm thinking of is kind of like these tiered structures where you have like a higher risk appetite capital, coming in, that essentially would allow us and other companies to reach higher risk customers that might be like higher credit risk. And I think that could be very catalytic, because every dollar in the structure can be levered with other kind of commercial banking dollars. But I think finding some innovative ways to bring in capital into these structures that, like I said, has a higher risk tolerance, but also really cares about the impact, could really accelerate the kind of growth in space, not to do things that are irresponsible per se, but I'm saying going into like countries that just might be higher risk, or areas within a country that could be just, deemed higher risk areas that are just challenging for us to go to today with
Reducing the
the commercial
risk
capital.
for commercial or more fiduciary investors, right? Is what I think
Exactly.
I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, that's one. And then another would be instruments that maybe what I would call them is like shock absorbing instruments. And maybe this is with the World Bank or others, like, and hedging would be one of these things. It's very difficult for companies to deal with currency risk. We typically raise dollars for equity and for debt, but the currencies we're collecting in are in these local currencies. And to an extent, we manage that through the securitization structure because we sell the local currency cash flows, and then we get them essentially up front and convert into dollars. However, there's a hedging cost built into that we then have to pass to the customer. And there still is kind of generally FX and hedging risk. All of these companies have, and any company that does financing. And to the extent there could be, like low cost or concessional cost, hedging, I think would be really helpful. It's very difficult for individual companies to bear that alone when their source of funding is coming in dollars. So that's one. And then the last thing I would say, which is maybe a broad point, this is both for the development finance institutions and others investing in this space. What I've noticed is that the capital seems to be increasingly sort of risk averse, which is sort of interesting. Over time, I think there's a real fear of any investment they make not doing well or them losing an investment. But when you look at sort of like venture capital, they lose several investments and they make a big return on a few. I know it's not necessarily their model, but
Yeah.
I think that the way the risk aversion can show up is like just kind of waiting a long time to see how things shape up and what happens, rather than being a bit of a leader in helping to spark a space where it is hard to get commercial investment, and that's part of what these development banks should do. And part of it also is just the time it takes for them to evaluate deals and get things closed. And I think development finance institutions are kind of notorious around this. There are some exceptions to this, by the way. Some can move
Mhm.
fast, but for the most part, it can be like twice as long as a typical investor. And time is so precious in an entrepreneurial venture. Every day, every month counts. So the kind of slow pace of the process
Yes.
hinders things quite a lot. So I would
Yes.
encourage find ways to drive efficiency and speed, because the speed of their processes sometimes versus what the realities on the ground don't align.
Yeah, no, I think those are very good points. And I think the point around, the defraying of the risk, doing it efficiently and not taking
Yep.
2 years to complete a deal, but maybe 6 months, which is normal
Yep.
in the commercial space, are very important. Similar to development bank, do you think the foundation have a role here, especially with young people like you who are starting new things and new areas of development? And we are not done with innovation, right?
Yeah.
Najib, there will be others, Sam Goldman and Nedjip Tozun, who will come up with other ideas. How do you see the role of foundation, and what can they do in, what you ideally would think that the role of the foundation could be to seed such innovations?
Yeah, and I think there's probably many roles they can play, but I think what comes to mind for me, just because I tend to sympathize with the entrepreneurs, um, is really finding a way to support like local entrepreneurs in the countries that we operate in. I think when I think about Sam and I and our journey, we had just so much support infrastructure, from whether it was just using the Stanford name or that network or all of that. Obviously we could have used whatever support we could have gotten. So, but I think the entrepreneurs, there are some brilliant entrepreneurs out of Nigeria or Kenya or India, and particularly I would say in Africa, you just find these entrepreneurs. There's just such a lack of basic sort of startup funding, of
Yeah.
like funding, like I believe in you, you can do this. It's sort of like, well, show me your revenue, show me your cash flow, and then I'm gonna maybe invest after you've really proven it. I think if there's a way foundations can support these people, even just to live, so they have like a salary to start building an idea in a business, I think can be amazingly helpful. And they could plug into, there's incubators already, across a lot of these countries. But if there's ways foundation can really support grow that next generation of entrepreneurs from these local environments, because there's like just incredible entrepreneurs. And like I said, they don't have the same things that Sam and
Yeah.
I got to
Don't
have
have,
at Stanford. It's not fair. I started d.light because I was annoyed by the kind of gaps and opportunities, and I see that, and would love for some organizations to help plug that gap.
Yeah, I think that's a great recommendation of focusing on local entrepreneurs in developing countries that don't have the profile of Stanford, like
Yeah,
you said, and seeking them out, I guess, through the Ashoka type ventures, right? Ashoka does,
yeah,
Bill
yeah,
Drayton does a good job in highlighting such entrepreneurs. I think one of my last questions to you, I always ask this question is what is your advice? I know we've talked a lot about this, but what would you say are your parting words for the young audience that are sort of motivated by your story? What would you tell them and that they have to do to
yeah.
achieve the success?
Well, what I would say is it is absolutely a marathon. It's not a
Yeah,
sprint. So you have to pace yourself. I mean, there are going to be times where you have to sprint. I will not deny that, but you can't be sprinting constantly all the time. And to really make meaningful change, I mean, when I kind of reflect on d.light's journey, we've really been pioneers in helping to create and co-create a whole industry. I mean, it's been amazing. We've seen huge transformation in so many people's lives, but it's taken 18 years to get here. I mean, it's not been like a short journey, but that's what it takes when you're wanting to make change at that scale. And I've seen this with many other kind of social impact entrepreneurs, the ones that really kind of make very large scale change. It just ends up taking a while, and that requires kind of that marathon mentality. You need to make sure you have outlets to recharge yourself with that rechargeable battery, find ways to
yeah,
recharge it and not a deep discharge. And
yeah.
yeah, find that grit and perseverance. Those are, like, I think, key attributes you need to develop in order to be successful.
Thank you. One question that I forgot to ask you, and I'll take I'll ask that now.
Yeah,
Subsidy. The key challenge is from my perspective in the off-grid solar sector has been the challenge between profitability, volume, versus affordability, which is, taking care of the cost of doing business, in the last mile areas and what it takes to do that. Subsidy has been an important element for most of the rural utilities in even the United States are highly subsidized. What
yeah.
would you say about that? That this it sort of becomes a bad word for subsidy and the idea that you're subsidizing for-profit companies through foundation resources. What would you say to that sort of thinking, or how would you sort of encourage some level of subsidy to really create the scale and volume where your
Yeah.
profitability turns in and you can lower the prices to create affordability. I think that's one of the crux of this industry. Maybe you can give your thoughts around that.
Yeah, and I think subsidies are for sure justified in this space. I used to be a little anti-subsidy actually at the beginning, and now I've become pro-subsidy, and I'll tell you the reasons why. Because I've seen the alternatives, or well, I'll say first of all, people who have access to electricity in these markets, electricity is subsidized
Yeah.
because all these utilities pretty much are running at massive losses. So
Yes.
already electricity cost is subsidized. It's been subsidized in developed markets too, as when the grid was being built out. Um, and that's because there's just such a tremendous societal benefit to when people get energy access. I don't think it's wrong that these things are subsidized. It makes sense because there's so many benefits to society. But yet, for the poorest, most rural customers, they're expected to pay full price, no subsidy. That doesn't make sense to me. What we do, what other companies do, we end up having a range of products. For, like, in our case, we have the bigger solar home systems so that people can afford it. It could be like big ones, smaller ones. And then for the people who can't afford those, we have solar lanterns. So at least they don't have to use kerosene. So there's kind of something for everybody in a village. But if we were getting a subsidy, and I think subsidies specifically, the best ones are often designed as like price subsidies. So it's the companies have to then reduce the price. Then you open up, for those, let's say the smaller home system, now all these people who are using lanterns, not all necessarily, but a chunk of them can now afford a home system and their life quality increases. And they can do more things. There's a lot, it enables economic productivity. There's a lot of stuff that supports with, and I think that's a positive thing. I think that some level of a price subsidy on these products, if kind of organized in a good way, executed well. I mean, these things are not easy. These programs can be um,
Fickle,
kind of,
yeah.
yeah, designed poorly, but a well-designed subsidy program that ends up reducing the price to customers, especially for those low-income customers, I think it makes a lot of sense. And it doesn't mean the companies necessarily are just taking the subsidy and charging the same price. It needs to be, it reduces the price, it grows the overall market, it grows the overall impact. I think that's sort of a win-win for everybody. And because energy just delivers so much overall society value, kids can read longer, anyway, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
It makes sense to have some level of subsidy funding going into it, just like it is in the urban areas, just like it is in developed countries.
Great. Thank you so much, Nedjip. It was a pleasure to go down memory lane and see your journey and what you have accomplished. And I'm very proud of you too, because you guys have done a tremendous, difficult work and
Thank you so
shown a
much,
new
Assad.
pathway to the world. Have a
It was
nice
great
day.
talking with you. All
Yeah,
right, you take
thank
care.
you. I'll send you the video in due course, probably in a week or two.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you. Have a nice
All right,
day.
you
Bye.
too. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.